The Washington Post newsroom delivers breaking events around the world as they happen. Unrivaled reporting from the journalists you've come to trust. To get the facts fast and meet the challenges of today head on. Get the news that matters most with a special offer by visiting WashingtonPost.com/watch. Subscribing unlocks instant access, bringing you the Post's award-winning coverage anytime, any place. Because democracy dies in darkness. Tonight, an Oval Office address from the White House by President Joe Biden as the nation tries to process yesterday's deadly shooting and what the FBI calls an assassination attempt on former President Trump's life that happened at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. Good evening. I'm Libby Casey with the Washington Post. Welcome to our live coverage. I'm with Rhonda Colvin, senior political correspondent, and James Hohmann, columnist. And we are live in the Fiserv Forum in Milwaukee, the site of the Republican National Convention. Tomorrow, thousands of Americans will come from all over the country to celebrate the presumptive nominee, Donald Trump. But tonight, a very different tone as President Biden speaks to the nation from the Oval Office. James, President Biden has addressed the nation already twice since the assassination attempt on Donald Trump yesterday. Why is he doing an Oval Office address tonight?
This gets at the core of why he says he ran and his rationale for running again, which is he said he was running for president to restore the soul of America. After Charlottesville, he has built so much of his reelection campaign around the violence that we saw on January 6th. And I think he's trying to show that he can rise to the moment and heal the wounds. He had run for president saying he was going to lower the temperature. And I think all of us, after yesterday, we're still learning a lot. We haven't learned anything about motives of the shooter. The FBI says there's no discernible ideology. But it's a reminder that the temperature has gotten really high, that our political discourse has sort of spun out of control. And I think this is going to be an effort by the president to level set with the American people, to bring down the temperature, to try to say we're better than this as Americans. Biden and Trump talked last night. The president actually canceled his beach weekend so that he could come back to the White House.
Rhonda, we're here in Milwaukee. Talk to us about just this contrast at this moment and what you're hearing from the people who are gathered here, anticipating what will be happening later this week, Donald Trump accepting the nomination for the Republican Party for president.
Yeah, you know, conventions are usually joyous times for the party having them. That's what we likely would have expected as Republicans were coming into town yesterday. But as some were coming into town yesterday, that's when the news broke. And my sense has been that there's been a lot of shock, there's been a lot of dismay, there's a lot of questioning of where is this going to go, not only among Republicans, but, you know, average Americans, people here in Milwaukee who live here. I was watching a few hours ago, the Secret Service, as well as local officials, gave a briefing to the press and talked about security measures here. And I noticed that the chief of police and also the mayor, they were really concerned about making sure that people felt safe. They were saying that we've been planning security for 18 months. And that everything would be okay. But I think this is a moment where a lot of people want some reassurance. And I think this race, this campaign we've been covering, I mean, there have been so many twists and turns over the last year. There is so much uncertainty already. And for this to happen, I think is increasing people's anxiety. So that, again, with what James was saying, this is a moment for Biden to address that and talk about the temperature.
Well, joining us now over the phone is Tyler Pager, White House reporter. Tyler is in Washington, where we'll see President Biden speak in just a little bit. Tyler, what has the last 24 hours been like for President Biden? James was saying that Biden and Trump did speak by phone. What has been Biden's goal throughout this?
Yeah, so we got a readout of the president's schedule over the last 24 hours. He found out about the shooting as he left church. He often goes to church on Saturday evenings. He was in Rehoboth, as James said, found out that the shooting had occurred, got a briefing, and then addressed the nation very briefly from the police department in Rehoboth Beach, has made the change to his schedule to come back to Washington early this morning, spoke this afternoon, and then will give this primetime address from the Oval Office tonight. And one of the things that we've heard Biden talk about since before he ran for president in 2020, is his concerns about political violence, his concerns about political rhetoric. It is what drove him to run for president in 2020. In fact, that Charlottesville rally where someone was killed and, white nationalists marched around Charlottesville, that was so animating for him that it drove him into the race. Again, in 2024, if you look at his re-election announcement video, it starts with images of the January 6th insurrection. These are forces that the president has been concerned about for quite some time, and I think we'll hear him speak to that tonight in his address to the nation.
What position does this put him in, Tyler, to have it be his opponent running for president? And while we've certainly seen some Republicans calling for unity and peace, we've also seen others like J.D. Vance going on social media really accusing Democrats of inflaming the tensions and the anger against Donald Trump.
Yeah, this is an incredibly delicate moment, right? He is running for president against Trump. In the past few days, he has been clear that he recognizes he needs to be more aggressive in taking the case against Trump, making it clear his policy positions versus Trump. And now this moment has been incredibly changed by the attempted assassination of his political rival. And so I think the campaign and the DNC and the White House are trying to figure out what that balance looks like as he moves forward. Obviously, we saw the campaign take down communications and ads. He canceled the event he was going to do in Austin, Texas tomorrow. But in conversations I've had with campaign officials, they say that after he sits for this pre-scheduled interview with NBC and Lester Holt, in which he plans to largely focus on political violence and rhetoric and trying to bring the temperature down, the campaign will resume its activities and trying to draw contrasts with Trump and Republicans. This is a very delicate moment for President Biden. Just 24, 48 hours ago, he was dealing with new calls for him to step aside as the presidential nominee, and now he's trying to both lead the nation through an act of extreme political violence while also mounting an aggressive campaign against Donald Trump, with the election just, more than 100 days away.
Tyler Pager, White House reporter, thank you so much. James, the Oval Office address is something that's sort of iconic, right? It's something that we can picture those moments in American history since the dawn of television when we've seen the presidents speaking from the Oval. Joe Biden hasn't done it that often. Why does this rise to that level?
This is only his third address, and it really is... he already spoke twice. It reflects...
In the last 24 hours.
In the last 24 hours. It reflects the sense that this is a moment he needs to rise to. This is the kind of thing that I'm sure he's working with John Meacham, who's become his advisor on some of these sort of big historically sweeping moment. Yeah. And I think he's trying to speak with the authority of the presidency, that he's not speaking as Democratic candidate Joe Biden, but as President Biden. And I think he is going to... I don't think he's going to take responsibility for his role in the rhetoric. I think he's going to avoid, blaming Donald Trump for his role. I think he's going to try to say something that sort of speaks to our broader civic culture about, as Americans, we're better than this. I assume we'll hear language about how, there's a lot that divides us, but so much unites us, that we need to reject political violence in all its forms, that ballots, not bullets, should decide who our leaders are. The kind of elevated rhetoric that the president enjoys, and that also might help him after 2 weeks of being judged very harshly in a very partisan political light following that debate performance.
Yeah, I also think this is a part of a larger moment for Biden, because if you think about it, both sides of the aisles, members from both sides of the aisles have been attacked. You have members of Congress. We've heard from the Capitol Police who have said that attacks or threats on them have actually heightened after January 6th. I noticed yesterday, right after this news broke, that there was a letter sent out by the sergeant at arms telling members, take all the resources you can, because, they're out, they're campaigning, their House members are all up for re-election, and these are dangerous times. So this is something that affects anyone running at this moment, and I think that Biden may try to get at that, too, that this is a collective moment, that we all should be taking a step back because it affects everyone.
The light has been flashing red for a while. You think about Steve Scalise, Paul Pelosi, but even going back pre-Trump, Gabby Giffords. I mean, it's unthinkable, but political violence is sort of an unfortunate reality of our culture.
Let's bring in Dan Baltz, chief correspondent covering national politics, the presidency, and Congress. He's here in Milwaukee to cover the convention this week. Dan, you wrote this morning these words: though there was widespread condemnation of violence, there was no cessation of the political warfare. What does that mean, and why is there not that cessation of the warfare?
Well, Libby, this is a very consequential election in a very divided society where people are angry and they're fearful and they're worried about the future of the country. And their sense is if the other side wins, it's kind of the end of the country as we know it. And so the supporters of Donald Trump, understandably, are very angry as a result of this. They have a long list of grievances about the way they think he has been treated and attacked unfairly. And we saw some of that in the immediate aftermath of the shooting last night. I think the questions as we start the Republican convention tomorrow and as we await President Biden's speech tonight is the degree to which those two leaders move the dialogue into a slightly different place. Governor Shapiro from Pennsylvania, I thought, was quite eloquent on this today when he spoke to reporters. He basically said, we can and should disagree. That is part of what we are as a society. It is part of what politics is about. But we ought not to have violence come into that discussion, to be a part of the fabric of our politics. Unfortunately, it is. It's happened too many times. We know it. We condemn it whenever it happens, and then people tend to move on and go back to their respective places. So this is a moment that obviously will test President Biden. This is a message that he is quite comfortable with, the idea of unifying the country. And yet what we've seen during his time in office is the country is not more unified and in some ways maybe more divided. We know that the former president has used extremely strident rhetoric, has not discouraged violence at his rallies in the past. Now, luckily, he is alive and doing fine as a result of what happened last night. And he will have an opportunity to take a stage with a new lens looking at him, and we will see how he handles it. But this is a very fraught moment. We know it is. We know the rest of the campaign is going to be that way.
Dan, does this change everything in terms of this moment in the political discourse, as well as how the campaigns of both these men move forward?
I think it changes things at the margins, and I think we have to wait and see how much it changes things beyond that. I think everybody knows in a moment like this what are the right words to say. But then it is the question of what is the consistency of that message. For example, one of the central arguments that President Biden has been using in his reelection campaign is that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. He mentioned it again at the press conference he did at the end of the NATO summit last week. He fervently believes that. People who are on Trump's side believe that that is overheated rhetoric. So what does President Biden do? He probably is not going to give up on that argument, but does he couch it in different terms? Similarly with President Trump. I mean, some of the things that he has said have frightened people on the other side of the aisle. Talk about retribution, a willingness to use the Justice Department to go after his enemies. Does he continue with that kind of rhetoric, or does he bring it back to in a sense, a calmer and safer level? I think those are the challenges ahead. I don't know that it changes everything. It certainly changes a lot right now. We know that Republicans are clearly quite unified in the aftermath of this shooting. And we know that President Biden is presiding over a very divided party that with an ongoing debate about whether he is the right person to lead them against Trump in November. So in some ways, the scales have moved a bit. But again, we can't make instant judgments on these things. This campaign, as we've said before, has been very close for a very long time in terms of most of the national polls. In the battleground states, the former president has had an edge and continues to have an edge. But we'll see over not just the next week or 10 days, we will see over a period of weeks whether this has had a material effect on both the campaign dialogue and on the balance between the two candidates.
Dan Baltz, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you this week and reading all of your reporting. Thank you. Dan was talking about the rhetoric that's been used. Thanks, Dan. Just recently, Donald Trump was calling for a military tribunal for Liz Cheney just because she's spoken out against him and served on the January 6th committee that you covered so closely, Rhonda. What will you two be listening for in terms of turning up the temperature here in Milwaukee or turning it down? And from whom, right? Does it come from the top? Trump now controls the party. His daughter-in-law runs the RNC. Where does that responsibility lie, since the spotlight will be on the Republicans this week, Rhonda?
Yeah, I think we're all going to be listening out for that, but I think we're already hearing different shades of reaction. I think, as Dan pointed out, you are hearing from Republicans who are saying this is Biden's fault. He's been ramping up his rhetoric, so this is his fault. Now, you've also heard some people say, well, we do need to take a step back, all of us. So I think we're just going to have to listen out to who's going to be the loudest voice in all of that, on that spectrum. Is it going to be the people who are going to just point fingers, or is it going to be people who say, you know what, this is a time to step back for all of us, you know, and even hearing from the former President Trump, when he speaks on Thursday or any time before that, what is he going to say about this? Did this change the way that he will campaign, or is this going to be something that is an effective way to ramp up that part of the base that wants to keep speaking in extreme ways?
We got a real tell today. Nikki Haley had not been invited to speak at the Republican convention, and today she has, and she's accepted. And I think that that is an illustration of the change in tone that we can expect during this convention. Trump's not, you know, obviously this is the base, this is his crowd, but he's focused on winning the election. And I do think he's going to be trying to appeal to those suburban college-educated women that we talk about all the time. And I hear from sources in Trump world that he is sort of sending the message, let's ratchet down the rhetoric, let's not punch it up. And so I think, you know, they have Tuesday night is supposed to be a night that's focused on security. Originally, it was sort of make America more secure again. That was going to be a lot about immigration. Now I think it's going to be more about safety. And Trump's going to sort of use this to say the country's unsafe. We need to return to safety. And he's going to try to parlay this into really coming out of here with a Republican Party that has never, ever been this unified behind him. You think back to even when he was president, how many people in prominent Republican leadership positions really were uncomfortable with Trump. And this is very much his party, his RNC, his
Most
convention.
of those people are either gone from politics or they've changed their perspective.
Exactly.
Yeah. We'll talk in just a few moments with our colleague Isaac Arnsdorf, who was at the rally in Butler, Pennsylvania yesterday. We had him there. We had photographer Jabin Botsford there. They captured these moments that will go down in history. Let's just talk about what we know about what happened yesterday. President Trump was giving this speech. He grabbed his ear. He has said on social media now that he was shot in the ear. We know that shots were fired and that one man lost his life. He was shot in the head. There are others who are injured. We know information about the alleged shooter. He was killed by the Secret Service. He was on a rooftop. It raises a lot of security questions that we have, of course, going into this convention. Rhonda, I know you were listening to the briefing earlier by the Secret Service. What other reporting or information do you want to share with us now about just what we know about what happened yesterday, or how things are being dealt with today heading into the convention?
Well, I think one of the important things, and I think this is what we're looking at as reporters, but also the nation is interested in the motive. We don't yet know much of anything about the shooter. His name, of course, has been released, age, and all of those metrics.
He's a 20-year-old. He was a registered Republican. I mean,
and then also gave, I believe it was a $15 donation to a progressive, a movement aligned with progressive politics. President Biden, in his earlier remarks, he did say to the American people, don't judge this, don't try to figure out the motive just yet. Let the Secret Service, the FBI, the officials do the work and figure it out. Because that's a real concern, because people will take a few details, run with them, and use them. But this is a moment, again, where the president is trying to make sure that people stay focused on what's important and let the officials, law enforcement officials, do their job. And as you mentioned, there are two folks who were critically injured. and appear to be on the mend right now, but they did sustain very bad injuries in all of this. And of course, you have the trauma, of course, of being there. And, you know, when you even look at this video, and so many of us have seen it so many times, you know, when you hear shots like that and you don't know where they're coming from, that, you know, that's traumatic as well. So there's a lot, you know, going on with all of this.
And what we haven't talked about is how much Republicans, I think, were inspired by the defiance that Trump showed. You know, these images that we're seeing where he held up the kind of the reflex, the impulse to reassure rather than sort of cower. He held up his fist after he got hit, but then again as he was getting into his Suburban. And I think that you'll see Republicans make a lot of use of that imagery here this week, that he's sort of rising to the moment and that he's tough and strong. And it really is an image that will define his candidacy certainly this year and perhaps his entire political career.
Let's bring in our colleague Isaac Arnsdorf now, national political reporter. He's here in Milwaukee. Welcome, Isaac. But as we mentioned, he was at the Trump rally in Butler, Pennsylvania yesterday. I mean, Isaac, I'm grateful that you're here. I'm grateful that you and all of our other journalist colleagues are okay. As you've had probably barely any time to really reflect on the reporting that you've done, what are your biggest takeaways from that rally yesterday and how Donald Trump has moved forward from that moment?
Well, I think we're still kind of waiting to see. You know, he hasn't said anything personally. You know, he's made a few social media posts, but we haven't heard from him from his mouth since it happened. And, you know, we're going to be hearing from President Biden again in a few minutes. We're hearing from other party leaders. And I think it's really a moment where we have to see which way it goes in terms of, is everyone gonna take the opportunity to try to turn the temperature down, or is it gonna end up escalating into more finger pointing and inflammation?
Our colleague Jabin Botsford was there with you yesterday, Isaac, and he had a GoPro on his head to record things as he was photographing. I want to just show some of the footage that Jabin collected from yesterday, and then we'll talk to you about it afterwards. Isaac, stay with us here.
Means Make America Great Again, Joe.
Footage shot by our colleague Jabin Botsford, photographer who was there at the rally yesterday. Isaac, what was your experience of that moment?
So I was underneath Jabin was right down at the foot of the stage, as you can see, very, very close to Trump. I was in the press pen, which was like 100 feet back, and there's an elevated platform where the cameras, the television cameras, get some height. And I was underneath that initially for shade, but then that ended up being where I was taking cover once I heard the gunshots, and then trying to see what I could see from there, which there was a long period, it felt like a long time, between when the gunshots stopped, but before we could see Trump and know what happened to him.
Yeah, I mean, he crouched down behind the podium. So what did you realize in terms of his wellness and the fact, like, tell us about how you finally realized he was okay, even though he was bloodied?
Well, you know, when we saw that he had blood on his face, it wasn't clear where it came from. Was that was the injury on his face, or was it blood that came from someone else or somewhere else on his body? But he was clearly moving with assistance. as he was, it was not. He was surrounded by Secret Service to shield him, but also they seemed to be like helping him walk down the stairs and to the car. So we knew he was alive. We knew he was not seriously or didn't appear to be life-threatening injured, but he did seem to be exposed to some injury.
Isaac, I understand that after that happened, the crowd got pretty upset at the media who was there. What does that tell you about how this week could go here in Milwaukee?
Well, I mean, some of it was, there's always an element of that at Trump rallies, and in this instance, as people were turning around to walk out, the press is who they saw, and so some people started taking it out on them or on us. But I think that's another, that's a key question of whether that's going to continue to be stoked the way it has been stoked for years at this point, or if people are going to be trying to turn the page on that and tamp that down.
All right, Isaac Ornsdorf, thank you so much for being with us this evening. Appreciate your time. We're just a few moments away from Joe Biden, President Biden, making a speech from the Oval Office, so please do stay with us because we will bring that to you live, and then we'll have some analysis afterwards. Rhonda, what do you expect to hear from President Biden tonight as we all take in all that we're learning from people like Isaac and Jabin, eyewitnesses who were on the scene there? What is President Biden's job tonight?
Well, I think we might be able to take some hints from his early remarks today. He did talk about making sure that the full weight of the Secret Service was behind the RNC, that it was here, that it was also with Trump going forward. He also talked about an independent review that would take place into the events and the security measures, whether there were lapses, and he also said that would be shared with the American people. I think we're going to hear maybe some of those logistics, but I think overall he's going to be that consoler-in-chief, as he was called early on in his term, where right after COVID and the nation needed sort of a reassuring voice, he kind of fell into that, and he often shares his stories of loss, personal loss. So I think he's also going to try to bring that across to Americans, especially since the setting is the Oval Office. That's a very poignant place to do something like this. So I think he is going to try to rise to this moment, try to use it to unify. He did use the word unity a lot so far, so I think that's what we're going to hear.
James?
And this is happening against the backdrop of a bunch of Democrats in his own party who have called on him to drop. And the president has said he's not going anywhere. And I think what he's trying to accomplish tonight is rising above. He wants to be presidential. He is very comfortable in this role as consoler-in-chief, just like when we saw him at the NATO press conference. He's very comfortable in his kind of statesman role. This is something that does suit him. Presidents used to do these Oval Office addresses a lot more because people used to watch TV in prime time, before people kind of cut the cord. But it sort of declined in the Obama era because it felt like you were sort of weighed down by the office. The office was almost bigger than the person who was delivering the speech. But this is a situation where the president clearly wants the office to be what he's speaking from. And I do think that what's happened, literally right before he went to Mass yesterday, which is when President Trump got hit, he was on a call with congressional moderates, and Jason Crow from Colorado, a Democrat, was saying, you're going to have to quit. This isn't going to work. And I do think the president is trying to show leadership here in a way that not just appeals to people who are anxious, as you were using that word so well earlier, but also his own party to show I am in command. I can handle the burdens of the presidency because this is a burden. Ultimately, as you note, too, the Secret Service reports to him. So it's this tough thing. I think in Biden's head, this could have happened to him just as easily, that this could have happened to anyone. I think it's one of those things where when you're in the arena, when you're in public service, this is obviously it's every spouse's worst nightmare. And so I think, in kind of pinging some lawmakers today in both parties, there is this sort of it feels very personal to them, that it's not just about Donald Trump, but that it's about this isn't an attack on Trump. This is an attack on democracy. It's an attack on our kind of raucous system of having big, open public events and give and take. And and we don't want to lose that. And I think President Biden tonight will try to reach for our humanity, but also our shared civic pride.
Yeah. Part of the question will be how receptive is the audience, the American audience, to that message, to hearing it from the Commander-in-Chief, the President, to hearing it from a presidential candidate, and how will people in this room tomorrow feel about that message. We are broadcasting live from Milwaukee right now. This hall will be full and bursting to the seams just 24 hours from now as the convention really gets underway, and everyone here prepares to celebrate Donald Trump's acceptance of the Republican nomination. But tonight is a very different night because we'll all be listening to President Biden speak to us in just a moment from the Oval Office. It's an unprecedented moment, Rhonda. As we prepare to head to the Oval in about 1 minute, final thoughts from you as we get ready to listen.
I'm thinking about all the voters that I've spoken with in the last, the last few years. And there is one commonality that comes to mind. A lot of them say, I wish the rhetoric would just turn down. A lot of people are unhappy with politics, Republicans and Democrats. They're just tired of it. They're tired of just waking up every day and seeing such negative headlines about politicians and not knowing which side to, believe or just, sit it out. We've been doing so much reporting on there are people in the middle who are saying this year, I'm just not going to vote because I don't think politicians have my interest in mind, and they're, it's a nasty business now. So I'm thinking about people across the country I've spoken with who've just said,
My fellow Americans,
let's go now to the White House.
I want to speak to you tonight about the need for us to lower the temperature in our politics. And to remember, while we may disagree, we are not enemies. We're neighbors, we're friends, co-workers, citizens, and most importantly, we're our fellow Americans. We must stand together. Yesterday's shooting at Donald Trump's rally in Pennsylvania calls on all of us to take a step back, take stock of where we are, how we go forward from here. Thankfully, former Trump is not seriously injured. I spoke with him last night. I'm grateful. He's doing well, and Jill and I keep him and his family in our prayers. We also extend our deepest condolences to the family of the victims who was killed. Corey was a husband, a father, a volunteer firefighter, a hero, sheltering his family from those bullets. We should all hold his family and all those injured in our prayers. Earlier today, I spoke about an ongoing investigation. We do not know the motive of the shooter yet. We don't know his opinions or affiliations. We don't know whether he had help or support or if he communicated with anyone else. Law enforcement professionals, as I speak, are investigating those questions. Tonight, I want to speak to what we do know. A former president was shot, an American citizen killed, while simply exercising his freedom to support the candidate of his choosing. We cannot, we must not go down this road in America. We've traveled it before throughout our history. Violence has never been the answer, whether it's with members of Congress of both parties being targeted and shot, or a violent mob attacking the Capitol on January 6th, or a brutal attack on the spouse of former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, or information and intimidation on election officials, or the kidnapping plot against the sitting governor, or an attempted assassination on Donald Trump. There is no place in America for this kind of violence, or for any violence ever. Period. No exceptions. We can't allow this violence to be normalized. You know, the political record in this country has gotten very heated. It's time to cool it down. We all have a responsibility to do that. Yes, we have deeply felt strong disagreements. The stakes in this election are enormously high. I've said it many times that the choice in this election we make in this election is going to shape the future of America and the world for decades to come. I believe that with all my soul. I know that millions of my fellow Americans believe it as well. And some have a different view as to the direction our country should take. Disagreement is inevitable in American democracy. It's part of human nature. But politics must never be a literal battlefield, or God forbid, a killing field. I believe politics ought to be an arena for peaceful debate, to pursue justice, to make decisions guided by the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. We stand for an America, not of extremism and fury, but of decency and grace. All of us now face a time of testing as the election approaches. And the higher the stakes, the more fervent the passions become. This places an added burden on each of us to ensure that no matter how strong our convictions, we must never descend into violence. The Republican convention will start tomorrow. I have no doubt they'll criticize my record and offer their own vision for this country. I'll be traveling this week making the case for our record and the vision, my vision of the country, our vision. I'll continue to speak out strongly for our democracy, stand up for our Constitution and the rule of law, to call for action at the ballot box, no violence on our streets. That's how democracy should work. We debate and disagree. We compare and contrast the character of the candidates, the records, the issues, the agenda, the vision for America. But in America, we resolve our differences at the battle box. You know, that's how we do it, at the battle box, not with bullets. The power to change America should always rest in the hands of the people, not in the hands of a would-be assassin. You know, the path forward through competing visions of the campaign should always be resolved peacefully, not through acts of violence. You know, we're blessed to live in the greatest country on earth, and I believe that with every soul, every power of my being. So tonight, I'm asking every American to recommit, to make America, think about it. What's made America so special? Here in America, everyone must be treated with dignity and respect, and hate must have no safe harbor. Here in America, we need to get out of our silos, where we only listen to those with whom we agree, where misinformation is rampant, where foreign actors fan the flames of our division to shape the outcomes consistent with their interests, not ours. Let's remember, here in America, while unity is the most elusive of all goals right now, nothing is more important for us now than standing together. We can do this. You know, from the beginning, our founders understood the power of passion. So they created a democracy that gave reason and balance a chance to prevail over brute force. That's the American we must be. An American democracy where arguments are made in good faith. An American democracy where the rule of law is respected. An American democracy where decency, dignity, fair play aren't just quaint notions, but living, breathing realities. We owe that to those who come before us, to those who gave their lives for this country. We owe that to ourselves. We owe it to our children and our grandchildren. Look, let's never lose sight of who we are. Let's remember we are the United States of America. There is nothing beyond our capacity when we do it together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops.
President Biden speaking from the Oval Office, striking a tone of humility but also intention, saying it is time to cool it down, that disagreement is inevitable, but that it should never rise to violence. It was a little bit of politics, but a lot of a presidential message calling on the American people not to normalize violence and instead try to work towards peaceful elections. I'm Libby Casey. You're watching live coverage in the Washington Post. I'm with Rhonda Colvin and James Homan. Rhonda, initial reactions to President Biden's speech.
It was much of what we had expected and had discussed, that he was going to try to strike this tone, to try to bring the temperature down. He did kind of do a little campaigning in there as well, and talked about, you know, his vision as well. I think one striking thing he did was list some of the attacks that have happened to other politicians. Some things people may have forgotten. With the Michigan governor, who there was the plot to kidnap her. There was the attack on Speaker Pelosi's husband. I mean, there are so many when you think of it, and they've happened on both sides of the aisle. But overall, I think that this was a moment where he feels like he must get in front of the cameras, the American people, and discuss the moment we're in. And I was also thinking, too, political violence has been a big part of his first term. You know, it's been all over the place. I'm thinking about when we covered Merrick Garland's confirmation hearing in the Senate when he was picked to be in his role. I remember part of it was because of January 6th, and he was seen as someone who would be able to address extremism. I've covered on the Hill when Christopher Wray has testified to members of Congress that political extremism is getting over the top as a concern. So it's also striking, too, that this is probably going to be a part of Joe Biden's legacy overall when you look back years from now, how he dealt with political violence.
You know, James, it was interesting the way that President Biden spoke about this. He talked about, you know, it's unacceptable to see a planned kidnapping of a governor, the attack of a speaker's husband. It's like they were symbols, not a specific name, but it could have been anyone, right?
Exactly.
Those happen to be Democrats, didn't have to be Democrats. But then he did talk about Donald Trump, of course, by name and personally.
Yeah, but I think he sort of modeled good behavior in terms of rhetoric. So one of the things, having watched Biden a lot the last couple of weeks, you know, coming out of the debate in Detroit and Wisconsin and some other places, he has been saying Donald Trump is a dire threat to democracy. He said on Monday that we need to put Donald Trump in a bullseye. And today he had a line. He said, the higher the stakes, the more fervent the passion. And that gets to what our colleague Dan Balls was talking about beforehand, which is there are a lot of Republicans who are sort of frustrated because if you feel like this is going to be the last election ever, it makes it makes extremists more likely to try to take things into their own hands. And so I think Biden was actually practicing what he was preaching tonight, where he said elections can't be killing fields. You have to have action at the ballot box and getting us to recommit. It was kind of a pay-on to the American Democratic small d process. And, you know, it was a short and sweet speech that I think, you know, obviously wasn't too partisan, but didn't downplay the very real differences that do exist between Trump and Biden. And he even sort of previewed that a little bit by saying, you're going to hear them attack my record. That's okay. That's the way the system is supposed to work. And I think that that's a message a lot of Americans need to hear because people have gotten not just so angry, we know about the anger, but the way they talk about the other side is dehumanizing. Melania Trump actually put out, I thought, a very poignant statement today that it really sounded like she wrote herself, where she talked about how her husband has been dehumanized. And, you know, I think a lot of Democrats would say, well, Donald Trump has dehumanized the other side. But the point is there has been this dehumanization. And maybe this is an unfortunate, unwelcome chance to lower the temperature. And, you know, I heard a few minutes ago that the chairman of the DNC, Jamie Harrison, called the chairman of the RNC, Michael Whately, and said, how can we work together? And we'll see how long it lasts, right? You know, maybe it won't last very long. But it feels like there's this moment of opportunity where maybe as a country we can heal some of these wounds that have opened up these last couple of years, as you've been talking about, where political violence has become so commonplace.
Yeah. You know, I was also thinking, too, Joe Biden comes from a time where, you know, senators would go to lunch or to dinner with a person from the opposing party. I was talking to a member of Congress last week who said he was a Democrat. He went to dinner with a Republican, and the Republican got in trouble from a few of his colleagues who said, what were you doing at dinner with him?
Right.
And he said, that's not how it used to be. Right. And I was thinking Joe Biden came from that world, too. Yeah. And perhaps...
He's done funeral addresses for so many Republicans. You know, it just, because... Yeah. It's a different way. You're so right, Rhonda. It's a different way of thinking about politics, right? Yeah. It stops at the dinner table.
As he said, you know, get out of your silos. And it's true. A lot of people are very siloed these days.
So the president talked about what we do know, and he went into the concerns that he has about the political temperature and trying to be a more civil society. But before that, he talked about some of what we don't know, and those are answers to the motives of the shooter, some of the puzzles that law enforcement is going to be trying to untangle in the coming hours, days, weeks, and perhaps even months. Let's just talk a little bit about the role that the Secret Service is playing in this moment, James, and what questions linger there.
You know, it was interesting because he said we don't know the motive and we don't know whether he had help or support, which is interesting because the FBI a few hours ago in a public briefing said that he did act alone. He appeared to have acted alone. But there's obviously so much. The FBI has gotten a hold of his phone. We're told that the family of the shooter is fully cooperating. The gun that he used, an AR-style rifle, was purchased legally by the father. The government has said it's not, there's no indication that it was sort of a straw purchase where the dad was buying it so his son could have it. But I think Biden is right. We don't know the ideology. You think back to the Kennedy assassination. Thank God this was not an assassination. Even now, 60 years later, a lot of people think that Lee Harvey Oswald is connected to right-wing extremism because that was the narrative coming out of the Kennedy assassination. But it turned out that Lee Harvey Oswald had actually gone to Cuba and had a lot of left-wing views and was angry at JFK sort of from the left for his meddling in Cuba. But because it was Dallas and it's a conservative area, this narrative sort of took hold. And you said it so well earlier, Rhonda. You don't want to jump to conclusions. You want the facts to be in, and you have to be so careful as we talk about these things and write about these things, because we don't know what the motive was, and some speculation is inevitable. But it's just so important to be careful and to let some of those facts come in, and not just kind of rush to judgment or make assumptions based on what you would assume someone who would shoot at Donald Trump would think about the world.
Absolutely.
And so. And I think that was part of the humble tone that you were talking about, Libby, that the president set right at the top of that address.
Rhonda, the Secret Service has been questioned about the security here. We are, a reminder, at the Republican National Convention site in Milwaukee. You can see this sort of cavernous, empty space behind us, but it will be just full of people and voices and noise tomorrow. The Secret Service has said they're not changing their plan, that they have a plan in place and they're sticking with it.
Yeah.
But they're getting critical questions for that.
They are getting critical questions. There's concern even that there is an area around the Fiserv Forum where we're at where you can carry firearms. And in light of yesterday's events, you're wondering, are they going to rethink that? How are changes going to be made? But for now, they say they are sticking to all the plans they've had in place. And, we haven't had conventions like this for a few years now, because the last two were,
COVID.
Because of COVID, they were virtual. So people may forget that planning for this happens over the course of a couple years. Local planning, federal planning, the Secret Service, of course, heads up a lot of the security apparatus. But last night when this news broke and I came downtown to this area, you could sense that security was a big focus now. And that looms large right now over the attendees and the rest of the week.
Yeah, totally. More than 40 law enforcement agencies involved in this. And we just walking in to the arena saw so many different state troopers from all over the country. It does feel, this is my 10th convention that I'm covering.
How old are you, James Hellman?
But there's just more of it kind of actually in some ways feels like the post 9/11 conventions, where the security is just more on edge. People are more aggressive about checking your credentials, that kind of thing. And I think that's okay. Tom Cotton, the Republican senator from Arkansas, said earlier today, this hall right here is going to be the safest place to be in America this week, because no one's going to take any chances.
Well, we will be broadcasting all week from here in the Fiserv Forum here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the site of the Republican National Convention, which marches forward. We know that Donald Trump has arrived here and he's slated to accept the nomination later this week. We're also watching to see who he will unveil as his pick for vice president, and we'll be live broadcasting here every night as the convention gets underway. Final thoughts from the two of you as we exit this, again, an unprecedented night, hearing the President of the United States make an address from the Oval Office talking about an assassination attempt on his political rival, but also the former President of the United States. James?
I mean, this week is going to be quite a split screen. President Biden is going to go ahead with his interview with NBC's Lester Holt tomorrow, but he's canceled his trip to Austin, Texas. He was going to speak on the 60th anniversary of the signing of the Civil Rights Act at the Lyndon Johnson Presidential Library. But the White House is saying that he still is going to go ahead with plans to travel to Nevada later in the week. Normally, historically, the party that wasn't having the convention was down. They would just kind of let it was like kind of one of those old-timey courtesies. Biden's not going to do that, but he's going to have to get the tone right, just as Trump's going to have to get the tone right here, and there is going to be this split screen all week. I think, a lot of times people say, oh, these conventions have become infomercials, whatever. This is going to be must-see TV. The suspense about the VP, I think that Donald Trump's going to get one of the biggest audiences he's ever had when he comes into this arena and addresses the delegates, having survived this attempt on his life.
Rhonda?
Yeah, there's the politics of the week. There's all the anticipation that James just laid out. But I also think this is a pretty pivotal week when it comes to the rhetoric in our politics. And I think a lot of Americans are going to look at this week and the days and the weeks ahead to see, does this change anything? There was an opportunity right after January 6th to change things. Things seem to get heightened at certain points. But this week is also going to be looked at for that, too. Is anything going to change?
Well, we will be broadcasting live, as James said. It will be must-see TV, but in this case, you can watch it with us. You can watch streaming on the Washington Post homepage, and you can also find us on YouTube. We'll be live every night starting at 7 o'clock Eastern Time, 6 o'clock Central, which is our new favorite time zone here in Milwaukee. Thank you so much for watching this broadcast with our team at the Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey. We will see you tomorrow night.